Shalom guys, welcome back to another episode here at the Shavu Ministries with Casa Israel. I am excited to be with you today. I appreciate you. If you like the content that we're putting up on our channel, like, subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, put them in the comment section down below. So before we get started with this week's Torah portion, like I always tell you, let's do the Torah blessing. Baruch et Adonai HaMevorah, Baruch Adonai HaMevorah le'olam ba'ed, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam, asher bahar banu mikol ha'amim, ve'natan lanu et Torato, Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'Torah. Bless Adonai who is blessed, bless Adonai who is blessed now and forever. Blessed are you, Adonai, sovereign of the universe, who has chosen us from among the nations and has given us the Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, giver of the Torah. Amen. So, this week's Torah portion is Shelach Lecha. Let's get started. So, Shelach Lecha, send for yourself. Now, before we get started with this week's Torah portion, let's understand the magnitude of this week's Torah portion. Because Israel started with a promise to Father Abraham. Then it went down from Isaac and Jacob. And from Jacob, they became a family, 12 sons. And they sent off their brother out of jealousy to Egypt. And so now they're in Egypt. And because there is a famine, their brother Joseph is the chosen one, and he is the one that has the answer to the solution of this famine that is going on in the world. And they had to go and seek him for his provision, because Elohim had basically taken care of him because he obeyed God's commandments and obeyed God's will. And now they stayed there. They stationed in Egypt, and then a Pharaoh rose up and oppressed them. As a family, they were being oppressed in Egypt. They asked for the Father to redeem them, and he sends Moses. And Moses brings them to the desert. And in the desert, they're given a new name, a new identity. They're given the structure of God's kingdom, a blueprint from heaven. They're given the tabernacle, commandments, the Levitical priesthood, and how they were going to minister and help the people approach God, the creator of everything. Then he gives them the structure of an army, or the troops, and how they were going to move to lead the people into the promised land. Now they are in front of the promised land, this week's Torah portion. And so we're introduced to it. But before we get started and we see the details, because we're going to point out some things in this week's Torah portion that the people have done, right? So after they've been given a name, they have been redeemed, they have given a new opportunity, and they went from a family that was oppressed in Egypt to a mighty nation led by the Creator. So let's get started with this week's reading. It starts in Numbers chapter 13, and it says, "Vayadaber Adonai el Moshe lemor shelach lecha anashim vayatudu et eretz Canaan asher ani noten lebne Israel ish echad lemate abotech ish lahu chol nashi bachem." And in English, it says the following: "Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Send for yourself men, so that they may spy out the land of Canaan, which I am going to give to the sons of Israel. You shall send a man from each of their fathers' tribes, every one a leader among them." So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran at the command of the Lord, all of them who were heads of sons of Israel, right? And then it gives you everybody that went on behalf of the leaders. Now, we're not going to read all the names, but it says here, these are the names of the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land. But Moses called Hoshea, the son of Nun, Joshua. When Moses sent them to spy the land of Canaan, he said to them, "Go up there into the Negev, then go up into the hill country, see what the land is like, and whether the people who live in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many. Who is the land in which they live? Is it good or bad? And how are the cities in which they live? Are they like open camps or without fortifications? How is the land? Is it fat and lean? Are there trees in it or not? Make an effort then to get some of the fruit of the land." Now the time was the time of the fruits reap grapes. So they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Sin as far as Rehob at Lebo Hamath. When they had gone up into the Negev, they came to Hebron, where Ahiman, Sha'i, the Talmai, the descendants of Anak were. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Soan in Egypt. Then they came to the valley of Echol, and from there cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes, and they carried it on a pole between two men, with some of the pomegranates and the figs. That place was called the valley of Echol, because the clusters which the sons of Israel cut down from there. So here's explaining to them the route that they took and how they took the fruit and the instruction that Moses gave them when they went into the land and how they were going to scout it. Okay, now it says here the report, which is the most important part, one of the most important parts of the beginning of this week's Torah portion. And it says, when they returned from spying out the land at the end of the 40 days, they proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the sons of Israel. And in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh, they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Thus, they told him and said, we went into the land where you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey, and this is the fruit. So they gave a good report, the introduction. But then they say, nevertheless, the people who live in it, in the land, are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Amalek is living in the land of the Negev, and the Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites are living in the hill country, and the Canaanites are living by the sea, by the seaside of the Jordan. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, we should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome it. So here we're starting to see a negative mindset that is affecting the people, because these leaders were chosen to go into the land. Now, it's interesting that the leaders that were chosen were not necessarily the leaders that were chosen in the beginning of the Torah portion or the book of Bamidbar. These were different leaders that were chosen to go into the land. But nevertheless, they came, and that gift that God has promised Abraham, which is what we're going to get into, they had come and said, yes, it does flow, milk and honey, but there's giants and there's people that we will not be able to overcome. And Caleb says, no, we will take possession of this land. We can do this. Okay, so let's keep reading. But the man who had gone up with him said, we're not able to go up against the people, for they are too strong for us. So they gave out to the sons of Israel a bad report of the land which they spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone in spying it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great size. There also we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, and so we became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. Now, when they returned from spying the land at the end of 40 days, they proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron. And this is when it gets worse, because now these leaders spread this message throughout the congregation. And they say, then all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried. The people wept that night. All the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in the wilderness? Why is the Lord bringing us into this land? To fall by the sword, or our wives or our little ones will become plunder? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? So they said to one another, let us appoint leaders and return to Egypt. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces in the presence of all the assembly of the congregation of the sons of Israel. Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, of those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes, and they spoke to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord is pleased with us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people in the land, for they will be our prey. Their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear. But all the congregation set to stone them with stones, and they brought. Then the glory of the Lord appeared in the tent of meeting to all of Israel. Okay, so now Israel has been grumbling against the land, against the leadership. And so we're going to get into this and prepare some notes. Like I said before, this week's Torah portion starts in Shelach Lecha, and Numbers 13, verse 1 through Numbers 15, verse 41. The prophets portion is Joshua chapter 2, verse 1 to 24, and Hebrews chapter 3, verse 7 through chapter 4, 11. So when we pay attention to this week's Torah portions, and you've been listening to my rookie Hebrew reading, you have noticed that it says, V'yedaber Adonai el Moshe lemor daber. And so Elohim is speaking to Moses most of the times, giving them a command to tell the people. But here it says, V'yedaber Adonai el Moshe lemor Shelach Lecha. Okay, and it says, send for yourself. It is understood that the idea of scouting the land was something that was given by the people, not by Elohim. Even though Elohim says in this chapter of Numbers, chapter 13, he says that we should send scouts, pick leaders to check the land. In reality, when we go to Deuteronomy chapter 1, and we hear Moses in his moment of venting out frustration, he tells the people the following. Then, just as the Lord our God commands us, we left Mount Sinai and traveled through the great and terrifying wilderness, as you yourself remembered, and headed towards the hill country of the Amorites. When we arrived at Kadesh Barnea, I said to you, you have now reached the hill country of the Amorites that the Lord our God is giving us. Look, he has placed the land in front of you. Go and occupy it, as the Lord, the God of your father, and has promised you. Don't be afraid, don't be discouraged. But you all came to me and said, first let us send out scouts to explore the land for us. They will advise us on the best route to take and which towns we shall enter. This seemed like a good idea to me, so I chose 12 scouts, one from each of our tribes. Now, the people of Israel have already rebelled. And so this is the fourth rebellion, right? Rejecting the land. So the first rebellion was when they murmured after Bera. And it states that they used the word ra'ah. Ra'ah has a primitive root, which means properly to spoil, literally, by breaking to pieces, or figuratively, or to make or be good for nothing, or bad, physically, socially, and morally. So they were speaking bad about being in the desert, and they were complaining to Elohim. The second rebellion was when they complained for meat, right? They said that they would love to go back to Egypt because they wanted meat, and all they had was the manna. It is in Numbers 11, verse 4 through 6. And they rejected not only Elohim redeeming them from Egypt, but they also rejected the provision that God gave them in the desert. And Moses in this chapter in Deuteronomy reminds them that they were in the desert and they were protected from snakes, scorpions, and every beast that could have taken them in the desert. They were protected by Elohim. And so they had nothing to complain about, but they were complaining and they were rejecting what Elohim was giving to them in the desert. And then the third rebellion was when Miriam and Aaron murmured to Moses. Miriam basically spoke to Aaron saying that she can do what Moses can do, overlooking that God had chosen Moses, okay? Oh, this video is a little longer than usual. Please, drink your coffee. And bear with me. Matias, Alejandro, Vicky, Ariana, all you guys, pay attention, please. Thank you. Bear with me. So, God gave the people of Israel two instructions. First, he says the following, and I took this from the JPS Torah commentary. When God says, fear and not be dismayed. Though this phrase is an imperative, this formula is expressed as an assurance. Here it is based on a promise to which Moses has alluded. Israel's prior experiences of God's protection should prepare the people to accept this assurance, meaning that they saw what Elohim did in Egypt and how he defeated that nation. He says their failure to be satisfied by this, it brings on the following turn of events, right? The exhortation to not fear is one of the most characteristic expressions of religious feeling in the Bible and in ancient Near East. It is found in messages addressed by deities or their representatives to individuals facing battle or other trials. And it is accompanied explicitly or implicitly by promises of divine protection or victory. The patriarchs received such messages during difficult moments in their lives, as did Jeremiah and Ezekiel, upon their institution as prophets, and the Jews in Babylon during their exile. Some assurance became a standard element in divine commands before battle. It is addressed to the Israelites in the days of Moses and Joshua, and the priest is to deliver the same encouragement to the Israelite army in future war. In ancient Near Eastern kingdoms, kings tells of receiving the same messages in oracles from their deity. This assurance of divine protection enabled the people to face war and adversity with confidence. The hesitation of the Israelites in the face of this assurance reveals a serious flaw in their trust in God. Then, after they decided to send spies, then this is the instruction that they were given. Bring back a word on the route and the cities. So it literally means a report back to us the route and cities. The meaning is either the scouts should themselves determine the best route and the order in which the cities shall be attacked, or they shall obtain information about possible routes, such as which are narrow and dangerous, and the fortification of the cities. The people's proposal to send out scouts contains the seeds of disaster. Some commentators argue that it reflects a lack of confidence in God's leadership, since choosing the route to follow is God's role, okay? And so we're going to talk about a couple people that are mentioned by the people when they come and give the bad report. The Amalekites, according to the Bible, the Amalekites inhabited the Negev. They appear to have lived nomadic or semi-nomadic lifestyles along the fringes of the southern Canaan agricultural zones. It is probably based on the association of this tribal group with the steppe region of ancient Israel in the area of Kadesh. As people, the Amalekites were identified as a recurrent enemy of the Israelites. This role appears in several stories, especially in Exodus 17, chapter 8 through 16. Amalek makes war against Israel in the wilderness. Joshua is ordered by Moses to lead Israel in battle, and Moses watches from the hillside. So this is when Moses is, lifting up his hands, and every time his hands go down, they lose, and every time Joshua lifted up his hands, they will win. Okay. Hey, another break. There's little breaks, so that way you guys can pay attention. Okay. Now, the Hittites were a group of people mentioned in the Hebrew Bible under the names Bnei Het, children of Het, who was the son of Canaan, right? They were described several times as living or near Canaan between the times of Abraham, and it's estimated that they lived around 2000 BC and 15,000 BC, and the time of Ezra after the return of the Jews from the Babylonian exile around 450 BC. According to Genesis, the Hittite Ephron sold Abraham the cave of Machpelah in Hebron for use as a family tomb. Later, Esau married wives from the Hittites. Now, the Amorites, and I took this from the Sundervan Illustrated Bible, the term Amorite can refer in general to a number of the inhabitants of the Levant, including areas known today as Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, and Palestine. It may also refer more specifically to an ethnic descent of Canaan as delineated in Genesis 10:16. Also, it is referred to Amru, or Amorite, or Westerner. In Akkadian records at Mari and the Martu, in Sumerian texts of the 3rd and 2nd millennium BC. Some of these group of people established city-states in Syria, while others were more nomadic, migrating southeast into the southern summer and southwest into the Levant. Egyptian records describe their territory as extending from Negev to the heights of Lebanon. The Canaanites. During much of the late Bronze Age, the land of Canaan was controlled by Egypt under 18 and 19 dynasties. As reflected in temple texts of the Thutmose I, Thutmose III, Amenhotep II, the Amarna letters, which is a great research to study, of the 14th century BC, and the text of Ramses II. Oh, you guys, pay attention, please. Thank you. Bear with me. I bring you these nations because they were very important in the message delivered by the people. They saw these nations, and I want you to understand that they were established nations and they were strong, just like every nation that is established in our lifespan, okay? But the focus that Elohim wanted to fulfill, and the focal point of this Torah portion, is the fulfillment of the promise, the prophecy that Elohim was not only going to give Abraham a land, but he was going to give him descendants, and he was going to redeem him from Egypt, and he was going to bring him into that land that he was going to give him to their descendants. We see this in Genesis 12, where Abraham is called by God to leave Ur and go to the place known as Canaan. The land of Canaan then became known as Israel. Israel was named after Abraham's grandson and is often referred to as the promised land because God promised it to give it to the land to the descendants of Abraham. God also gave a second promise, which was that Abraham was going to be a great nation. This is where God promises Abraham, Genesis 12 verse 2, he will make a great nation out of him and will increase his numbers very, very much and will make him a nation. This is when God changed Abram's name to Abraham, meaning father of many nations. So the people are failing to understand one simple thing, that God is trying to fulfill a prophetic and promise to their fathers. They're getting in the way of a manifestation of God's word in an immense power, because God wants to fulfill his promise to Abraham. He wants us to see that he wanted to do this. But the people got distracted again. We got distracted in what we wanted and what we thought was right, or what we thought was correct, or what we thought in our opinion. And we got in the way of God's purpose. And we got in the way of prophecy and a promise being fulfilled. The people had to have faith in Elohim. They forgot that they were redeemed from Egypt. Egypt was the mighty nation. As we read, Egypt did control Canaan. And since we can think that maybe that's why they were afraid, because they were going to encounter Egyptian partnerships or Egyptian troops that might have been stationed in Canaan. But it's irrelevant, honestly, because when you see God, the Creator, fulfilling not only his promise to Abraham, but fulfilling miracles in your eyes and destroying kingdom, one of the most powerful kingdoms, wouldn't you, as becoming a nation, given a structure, wouldn't you depend on that God? Wouldn't you listen to that God? The people of Israel decided to fulfill their own will. And it's something that we need to learn to suppress our own will. We can have an opinion, but I want my young students and anybody else watching now, I want you to understand something. Your opinion will not go above God's will. You can have an opinion and very much understood. Miriam had an opinion. She opinionated that she can do what Moses did. But God said, no, because I chose him. Korah, in the next Torah portion, he opinionated that he can do what Aaron does. But God said, no, I didn't choose you to do that. So we need to learn how to follow our role and follow God's word and his will, okay? And what he wants us to focus on. We cannot get distracted. We get distracted very easily. This week's Torah portion, Shelach Lecha, establishes that the people got in their way. Instead of obeying God's word and obeying God's voice, they decided to do their own will. And in the process, they rejected the land, the promise, the fulfillment of Abraham's promise by God. They got in the way of that. And with that, Elohim said that for the 40 days you were in the land, in the 40 days you were there, you came back with a bad report. So now you, your nation, and your generation will wander in the desert for 40 years, and your sons will go in. Are we going to do the same thing? Are we going to keep wandering in the desert? Or are we going to make our way and elevate ourselves to the promised land? Yes, maybe today we cannot go into the promised land and we can reclaim it. But we're called to prepare ourselves, because one day Messiah will come, Yeshua, and we will have to go up to Jerusalem, where we will like it or not. And remember, the land is good, very good. I haven't been able to go, but I pray that I have the opportunity to see it, because the day that I step on that land, I will cry like a baby. And those of you that know me, I'm a crier. I appreciate you. Oh man, I appreciate you guys for being there. This week's video was long. Sorry. I wanted to give you a little bit more information. Hope you guys have a great Shabbat, a great night, a great morning whenever you see this. And I hope you guys have a great week. Shavua Tov. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.